This video will get you ready for every subject in the TExES Core Subjects EC-6 exam. If you want to guarantee you'll pass, check out our full-length study guide here or in the description below. Let's get into it.
This video is going to prepare you for the Core Subjects EC-6 English Language Arts and Reading subtest. And this video is going to cover three things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the biggest concepts you'll need to know for test day, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. Let's jump right in. Now, the Core Subjects EC-6 English Language Arts and Reading test consists of 10 areas called competencies. These are oral language, word analysis and identification skills, reading fluency, reading comprehension and applications, vocabulary development, reading inquiry and research, writing conventions, written communication, viewing and representing, and assessment of developing literacy. I know, that's a lot. Each competency has descriptive statements that give more detail, but still not quite enough, about what will be covered on your exam. We'll go over a key concept from each competency. Now, if you want to see everything this exam covers, get a 240 study guide. The link is below. And let me go ahead and give you a tip. A lot of these questions are scenario-based. This means not only do you need to know the language arts content, but you'll have to apply it to a variety of teaching situations to find your best answer for the questions. Okay, let's take it from the top and talk about some of the most important things to know. The first competency is oral language. This involves the listening and speaking skills students need to develop as the foundation for learning to read. To develop their language skills, students need many opportunities to speak to a variety of audiences. Audiences makes it sound like they're doing public speaking gigs. Don't worry, it's nothing like that. It just means that students need lots of practice talking with one partner, a small group of classmates, or participating in a whole group discussion. So you don't have to worry about doing stand-up, but I have been working on my Type 5. Say, did you guys know that I'm friends with 25 letters in the alphabet? Yeah, it's true. I don't know why. Anyway, one good tactic for audiences of students is using sentence frames or sentence stems. Sentence frames give students part of a sentence, then they fill in the rest. They can be a great tool to help them explain their thinking or use more complex sentence structures. For example, if students are working with partners, the teacher might give them sentence frames to guide their conversation, such as, "I agree with you because," or "Why do you think?" The teacher can model using the sentence frames and post them on an anchor chart for students to reference. Here's a sentence frame for you. I will pass the EC-6 because I used 240. Remember to check that link below. Okay, now that we've talked about developing students' oral language, we're ready for the second competency. Competency 2 is word analysis and identification skills. Under this topic, students are ready to learn the nuts and bolts of how to read words on their own. There are several different strategies readers can use to identify a word. Let's zoom in on structural analysis. Structural analysis, also known as morphemic analysis or simply word analysis, refers to the process of breaking words into meaningful parts, or morphemes, to determine what those parts mean, and putting them back together to determine the meaning of the whole word. These meaningful parts are often prefixes, root words, and suffixes. Here are some examples. Revisit. This can be broken into the prefix re and the root word visit. Colorful. This word has a root, color, and a suffix, full. Unbelievable. This one has the prefix un, root believe, and suffix able. On your exam, you might be asked to select a word that morphemic analysis would work on. Let's make it a fun one. On which one could you use morphemic or structural analysis? Coffee, early, decaffeinated, drowsy. The answer is decaffeinated because you can break the word into the prefix de, the root caffeine, and the suffix ate to understand that it means, this coffee better have caffeine in it so I can make it through this video. That was an important topic to go over, but there's more to know under this competency. To fully prepare and get the confidence you need, subscribe to the 240 study guide. We've got the link to it in our description. Let's keep moving to the third competency. Competency 3 is reading fluency. Do you know the three components of fluency? They are accuracy, prosody, and speed. You might be asked a question about automaticity, which is the ability to read words effortlessly. For example, a student may spend a significant amount of time decoding words to have strong accuracy, but this would lower their speed. Students need to develop their automaticity to be truly fluent readers. You'll need to know some strategies for improving students' fluency. Choral reading, partner reading, and reader's theater are all great examples. It's especially helpful to have students read texts at their independent level, and to have them reread the same text multiple times. Basically, just have students read, 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 then read some more. I used to love to send a student to read to another person in the school, like a counselor, custodian, even the principal. They'd always come back glowing with pride, and it was great practice for fluency. That was just one piece of the puzzle for this competency. To really have the confidence you deserve, go subscribe to a 240 study guide. You can get the study guide for this test and all the other EC through 6 subtests. On to competency 4, reading comprehension and applications. Here, students move from learning to read to reading to learn. You need to know the difference between literal, inferential, and evaluative comprehension. And you'll need to be able to recognize which strategies or types of questioning are best to develop each kind of comprehension. To build literal comprehension, work on things like summarizing and identifying plot elements, like setting. For inferential comprehension, help students recognize cause and effect relationships and make predictions. To develop evaluative comprehension, model metacognition and help students make opinions about the text. To practice many of these skills, I loved using graphic organizers. When my team would be planning a reading lesson, I'd always say, "I've got a graphic organizer for that." So I wasn't as popular as the teacher who always brought in donuts, but your girl was pretty cool. I could talk about reading comprehension for days, but it's time to move on. Don't forget to stick around till the end of the video because I've got a practice comprehension question with your name on it. Here we are at the 5th competency, vocabulary development. In order for students to progress as readers, it's important that they understand the meaning of the words they're reading. So vocabulary instruction is an important part of teaching English language arts and reading. Most vocabulary is learned indirectly. Teachers should expose students to targeted words in multiple contexts. A great way to do this is to plan a thematic or integrated unit, so you can provide your students with lots of different opportunities to read, write, hear, and speak using the new terms. The more times a student comes across a vocabulary word, the more likely they are to make connections between those contexts and internalize the meaning of the word. Competency 6 is reading, inquiry, and research. I'm sure you're inquiring about what you'll need to research to pass this section. Well, sit back and relax because that's what I'm here for. We need to teach students the valuable skill of finding information from a variety of sources to answer questions. Here are the basic steps of the research process. First, develop a question to answer through research. This will become a thesis statement for high-level research. Next, locate credible sources with information that can be used to answer the research question. Then, create notes with paraphrased and summarized information from the sources. Finally, organize the information into a product to demonstrate findings from the research. This may be a graphic organizer, visual presentation, or expository essay. It's important to have a clear objective and a plan. And make sure students are starting with an open-ended question, like, why do volcanoes erupt? Is a better research question than, what temperature is magma? What I just talked about is just the tip of the volcano. There's lots more to learn in the 240 study guide. Click the link below so you can blow the top off your exam. So you can get a lava-ly score. So you can rock it. The 7th competency is writing conventions. This is all about how students develop in their use of grammar, spelling, and punctuation. I'm going to go over the most important things to know within the topic of spelling. Spelling development unfolds in a predictable sequence. Here are the stages you'll need to know. In the pre-communicative spelling stage, a child uses letters from the alphabet to represent words without demonstrating knowledge of letter-sound correspondence. The words appear as random strings of letters. In the semi-phonetic stage, some knowledge of letter-sound correspondence is apparent in a child's attempt to spell. It's common to see single letters used to represent whole words, syllables, or sounds in which multiple letters are conventionally used. As a child progresses to the phonetic spelling stage, they use a letter or group of letters to represent every sound heard in a word. Spelling choices still may not be conventional, but they're easily understood through the lens of letter-sound correspondence. The fourth stage is the transitional spelling stage, in which a child moves from depending solely on knowledge of letter-sound correspondence to incorporating knowledge of word structure and common visual representations of words in their spelling as well. More conventional spelling is present in the child's writing, but misspellings are still common and frequent. Last is the conventional spelling stage, when a student can apply knowledge of letter-sound relationships, general spelling rules, and morphology in their spelling. The child is better able to recognize misspellings, and the spelling in their writing is generally correct. Now, you might be thinking, everybody uses autocorrect. We don't need to teach spelling anymore. But we do, because teaching students conventional spelling frees up some of their brain power so they can focus on what they're writing, like their purpose and audience. Speaking of purpose and audience, Competency 8 is written communication. As part of their journey as budding writers, students must understand that there are many different reasons to write. Quality writing instruction includes teaching students about task, or the writing assignment, purpose, which is the intention for writing, and intended audience, or the recipient of the writing piece. When students have the right tools, they can know their audience and accomplish their writing goals. Writing a letter to a real person is an example of writing for a meaningful, authentic purpose. When I taught, while we were studying animal needs, I had my students assess the animal enclosures at our local zoo and write a letter to our local zookeeper with their recommendations. Knowing their purpose and intended audience made them feel so powerful. That was the biggest thing to know, but there's so much more. I didn't even get to the steps of the writing process. So to be sure you're prepared, let 240 help you. Click the link in the description to get our EC-6 English Language Arts and Reading Study Guide. We're getting so close. 2 more competencies to go, and you can proudly say you've reviewed the whole framework of your exam. Competency 9 is viewing and representing. You may be asking yourself, viewing and representing what? This competency is all about media. Elementary students need direct instruction on and practice with interpreting media, such as computer, television, magazine, and radio. It's important to teach the different functions and purposes of media. In particular, provide and discuss examples of persuasive media, such as political cartoons, magazines, newspapers, TV and computer ads, and signs in stores or on the highway. Direct students to first look only at the pictures rather than the text to try to determine what the illustrator is trying to say. You can model this with slides or printed materials, asking students to determine the connotative and denotative meanings of the examples. After discussing how visuals enhance meaning through various colors, styles, pictures, or media, you can have students create their own advertisements. But make sure to give them some guidance, because kids will be kids and you never know what you're gonna get. You made it to the finish line, to the top of the volcano, the 10th competency. This one is assessment of developing literacy. There are lots of different kinds of assessments to measure students' literacy skills. 2 important ones to know are formative and summative assessments. Formative assessments are assessments for learning. They're used to guide instruction, meaning they're administered to assess students' progress toward meeting a learning objective so teachers can adjust instruction as needed. They help teachers answer the question, what do I teach next? Examples of formative assessments are exit slips, running records, or simply observing students. Summative assessments are assessments of learning. They're used to gauge instruction by determining whether or not students mastered a learning objective. Teachers use them to answer the question, what did my students learn? Meaning, what do they know now, or what are they able to do now? Examples of summative assessments include quizzes, graded work at the end of a unit, or standardized assessments, like the Developmental Reading Assessment, or DRA. That's a really important part of assessment to know, but like I said, there's so much more you'll need to be ready to see on your test. To really make sure you're prepared, use the 240 Study Guide. It'll save you a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of worry, and possibly your job. You've already worked so hard. Take the next step to make sure you pass. Now, speaking of assessment, it's time for you to assess your knowledge of the topics we've covered today. Let's look at some practice questions to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot of practice questions, you can click the free practice test below. At the end, you get a score report on how well you did on the test. And then you can subscribe to 240 and get all the practice questions you need to be 100% confident for the test. Did I mention the 240 Study Guide has a money-back guarantee that you'll pass? Now for questions. Here's one from the first competency, oral language. A first grade teacher has informally assessed her students' oral language skills and identified certain students in need of support while orally answering comprehension questions. Which of the following activities would best support these students' oral language development? Expand vocabulary through reading a variety of genres. Schedule regular, formal assessments of their oral language skills. During whole class discussions, regularly call on these students to answer open-ended questions. Provide sentence stems or sentence frames to scaffold their oral language skills. This is the correct answer. Like we talked about at the beginning of this video, using sentence stems is an effective way to encourage the use of oral language skills while also providing support that will help build speaking confidence. Let's look at one from Competency 2. Here's one of those tricky structural analysis questions. Which of the following word sets would best support a lesson on structural analysis? Ate, eat, eating, eaten. Visit, revisit, visitor, visiting. Sweep, leap, heap, jeep. Late, ripe, hike, wire. This is the right choice. Like I said earlier in the video, structural analysis refers to breaking the word down into recognizable chunks to ease decoding. All of these words contain the word visit with varying prefixes and suffixes, so they would work as examples to explain the meaning of structural analysis. What about Competency 3, Fluency? What might those questions look like? A selection of students has been called aside for individual instruction based on the area they struggled in on a recent assessment. The teacher presents the students with a simple sentence, such as, "The cat ran very fast." The teacher reads the sentence one word at a time, with no intonation or expression. Then she models how when people read and speak, it is natural to emphasize certain words in the sentence. She tells the group, "Today we will be working on adding emphasis to a sentence and thinking about the effect that has on our understanding. I will call on you and tell you what word to emphasize, and then you will say the sentence, saying that specific word strongly." The teacher models once again, this time reading, "The cat ran very fast." Based on the nature of this activity, which area of reading fluency did these students need additional instruction in? Prosody, accuracy, speed, automaticity. Did you think I was going to show you a question about automaticity since I called it out earlier? Not this time. Through the question feedback in the study guide, I can see that automaticity is the ability to read words effortlessly. This activity is focusing on how to emphasize words and how that changes the meaning of a sentence, which would fall into the realm of prosody. So this is the answer. Now for the comprehension question that had your name on it. Mrs. Wright is reading a fiction story aloud to her class. She stops throughout to model the think aloud strategy. In her think aloud moments, she makes predictions about what will happen next and reflects on what the characters learn throughout each plot event. What level of reading comprehension is she modeling for her students? Literal comprehension, evaluative comprehension, inferential comprehension, circumstantial comprehension. Okay, right off the bat, we know that circumstantial comprehension isn't even one of the levels of comprehension, so we can ignore that one. This is the right one. The teacher was modeling the ability to understand what was read without it being stated explicitly, which is inferential comprehension. She's using her background knowledge along with what's happening in the story to make inferences about what might happen next and what the characters learn. Now let's look at a vocabulary question. How can a fourth grade teacher indirectly expose her students to content-specific vocabulary that they will need in their upcoming unit as a part of indirect and direct vocabulary instruction over the terms? Provide students with a list to define each word before the unit begins. Purposefully and frequently use the terms in class. Encourage students to use dictionaries when they come across unfamiliar words. Require students to find examples of the words used in the real world. This is the best choice. Purposefully and frequently using the terms in class will naturally expose them to the words and provide context for how they're used in a sentence. Since the teacher isn't directly defining or teaching these terms, it would be one of the various ways to indirectly expose them to the new vocabulary. Next up, reading, inquiry, and research. During a unit on conducting and writing research reports, a fifth grade teacher models each step of the research process by conducting her own research fully. She models choosing a topic, generating research questions, finding reliable sources, and pulling information from those sources to cite in her research. Which activity should the teacher model next to continue the steps of the research process? Organize research and begin outlining her research report. Adjust guiding research questions to meet the information she has found in her readings. Begin drafting her essay, starting with a thesis statement. Create a bibliography of the sources she'll use in her research report. This is the correct answer. Once the teacher has modeled how to find supporting details through research, the next step is organizing this data to then use while writing. She was in between steps 3 and 4 that I went over earlier in this video. What about a writing conventions question? Let's check one out. A first grade student writes the following sentence on the board, but means my dog licks my hand. Which of the following does the student's sentence best demonstrate? Pre-communicative spelling, semi-phonetic spelling, phonetic spelling, transitional spelling? This is the right choice. This stage is when children have some letter awareness. They may spell a lengthy word with a few letters, such as play as PA or talk as TK. Let's look at a question from the 8th competency, written communication. Which of the following would be the most effective way to teach young children about task, purpose, and intended audience? Share and model writing samples that demonstrate appropriate style. Ask students to create their own writing prompts based on their interests. Give a unique writing task each day so students will have exposure to a wide variety of writing modes. Prioritize formal style before introducing informal, personal writing tasks. This one's the right answer. Concrete examples and modeling appropriate style would best help young students understand task, purpose, and intended audience. Moving on to competency 9. Which of the following would be the best strategy to teach an elementary student the various forms of persuasive media? Have students read a magazine article and watch a TV documentary for environmental issues? Have students create a commercial for environmental issues? Have students research a political cartoon, a computer editorial, and a highway billboard concerning environmental issues? Have a guest speaker address current events? We talked about having students make their own ads, so I thought this was the answer. But the question feedback feature helped me realize that creating a commercial wouldn't necessarily teach students about persuasive media. Rather, it would be a good way to assess their understanding. So this is actually the answer, since it involves various kinds of persuasive media. Are you ready for your last question? Here it is, from Assessment of Developing Literacy. Which of the following would be an appropriate summative assessment for 4th grade students who are learning about parts of speech? Having students independently label each part of speech for words in a given sentence? Guiding the students through labeling a different part of speech on a sentence at the beginning of each class? Asking students to submit an exit ticket about parts of speech to guide the next day's instruction? Inviting students to come to the board to identify parts of speech together? This is the correct answer. A summative assessment individually tests students' knowledge of a subject. Asking students to label parts of speech independently is a summative assessment which can be used to determine whether students grasp the concept of parts of speech. Now that's just a small sampling of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are assessed on the test. Congratulations on finishing the video. If you found it helpful, give it a like. There's still plenty more to learn.
This video is going to prepare you for the Core Subjects EC-6 Math Subtest, and this video is going to cover 3 things. What's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that are going to appear on the test, and then we're going to look at a few practice questions. Now there's a lot to cover, so let's get rolling.
You don't have to literally roll up your sleeves.
I mean business. Now the Core Subjects EC-6 Math consist of 5 areas called competencies. These 5 areas are mathematics instruction and processes, number concepts and operations, patterns and algebra, geometry and measurement, and finally, probability and statistics. As you may have already been able to tell, each of these competencies contains an entire section of math education. But don't worry, we'll break it down piece by piece. And to test each of those pieces, stay with me to the end of the video because we're going to look at our test-aligned, authentic practice questions. I'm going to walk you through what you need to know for each competency, so let's start with mathematics instruction. Now, this is pretty straightforward. It's really just how you teach math. Within the first competency, there are 2 main things that will show up on the test. First, how to incorporate manipulatives and other tools, like calculators, into your lessons. Tangrams, counting blocks, fraction tiles, color counters, these are all manipulatives that can be used to enrich students' understandings of mathematical concepts. You'll need to know what they are and when it's appropriate to use each one. So, for example, if you're asked what manipulative would best help students understand that 2/4 is equal to 1/2, fraction tiles would be the best choice because students could visually see that together 2/4 tiles are the same size as a 1/2 tile. The second half of this competency is really pedagogy. This means you'll get questions about teaching math. Let's take a look at standard K from this competency. The beginning teacher uses a variety of formal and informal assessments and scoring procedures to evaluate mathematical understanding, common misconceptions, and error patterns. So basically being a teacher. What this translates to is you need to know about pre-assessments so you can understand students' prior knowledge. You need to know the difference between formal and informal assessments, and formative and summative assessments. Since this is math, it's helpful to know about how to connect math to the real world and to other subjects like science, music, even business. It's also important to know how to align assessments with instruction and what to do with the results, meaning how can they be used to effectively impact your instruction. So basically instructing and testing and again, it's like being a teacher. Now that we've covered the teaching part, let's start digging into what math you actually need to know. Let's start with number concepts and operations. Simply put, you'll need to be able to understand how to combine numbers and how different numbers relate to each other, which is what fancy math people call number sense. So this means that you need all the basics, how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, use exponents and parentheses, all that good stuff. And you'll need to be able to do all that using the order of operations. Remember PEMDAS? And you need to be able to do all that with whole numbers, decimals, and fractions. You know, all the stuff kids are famous for loving. Moving on to number sense. Now remember, number sense is when we talked about how numbers relate to each other. So how do numbers relate to each other? You know, that reminds me, why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. Anyway, as we talk about numbers relating to each other, these types of numbers relations include factoring, magnitude, and equivalency. And if you need to brush up on any of those, you can watch the videos in our study guide. We've got the link to our study guide in the description. But let me show you a quick clip of one right now. How about we brush up on factors?
Factors can be used to simplify and solve many problems. Factors are numbers or expressions that we can multiply together to get another number or expression. Factors can be numbers. For example, 2 and 3 are factors of 6 because 2 times 3 equals 6. Factors can also be terms or expressions. For example, x plus 1 is a factor within the equation x plus 1, y plus 2 equals 15.
And just like that, we're through competency 2. You're doing great. I'm excited. Next up on the tour, you're going to notice we've arrived at competency 3, because 2 comes after 3. It's a math video. This is patterns in algebra. Let's look around a little bit more. Now, you may know what's coming with patterns in algebra. You're going to have to solve for x. But you also need to understand slope-intercept form and how to create an equation from a data set. Solving for x is going to be pretty straightforward. The test will give you an equation like this one, and then you have to solve for x. So the way you approach this is you simplify as much of the equation as you can, you balance the equation, and you would find that x equals 5. Now we'll talk a little bit more about this later when we solve problems with the authentic practice questions, but right now I want to take a look at slope-intercept form. For this one, you really need to know one specific equation, and that is y equals mx plus b. In this equation, m is equal to the slope of the line on the graph, and b is the y-intercept. Hence the name slope-intercept form. So if you see the equation 3x plus 4 equals y, the slope is 3 and the y-intercept is 4. Last up in this competency is creating equations. Isn't that the job of the test makers? Yeah, I should be getting paid for this stuff.
That's not how it works.
Yeah, someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. So apparently making equations is a math skill. So when you create an equation, you'll probably be given words, and then you have to translate the words into a number sentence. So you'll need to be able to identify keywords that indicate what math actions need to be taken. So here's just a small sampling of words you'll see and the mathematical operation that they indicate. And you thought this was a math test. Turns out, just for fun, they're going to test us on language too. But don't worry if this looks like a foreign language, because we translate it for you in the study guide linked below. This brings us to geometry and measurement, which just might be the most straightforward of all the topics we're going to cover, because you're going to need to know, well, geometry and measurement. The word geometry really just means the study of shapes, so you'll need to know the basic attributes of basic shapes. So this includes using the Pythagorean theorem for triangles and knowing how to use different formulas to find the area and the perimeter of all basic shapes. We've got a really great video in our study guide about this, so I'm going to give you a sneak peek really quick.
The perimeter is the whole distance around the outside of a figure. It is a one-dimensional measurement, so it always has to be labeled in units such as inches, feet, miles, or centimeters. The area is the amount of surface inside a figure. It is a two-dimensional measurement, so it will be labeled in square units, such as square inches, square miles, square centimeters, or square kilometers. Here are the formulas for finding the perimeter and area of squares, rectangles, and triangles.
See? Super helpful. But again, to really have the confidence you deserve, subscribe to a 240 study guide. You get the study guide, you get all the practice questions, the quizzes, the flashcards, the full-length practice test, the guarantee. You get the whole kit and caboodle for a single subscription. Now, what about measurement? A big one here is learning to estimate measures like weight and length, and choosing the appropriate units. It helps to have some real-world equivalences to compare to, like the ones we've provided for you here. So if someone asks you for the height of a classroom, you'd likely measure it in meters. Millimeters, centimeters, and kilometers, it just doesn't make sense because your answer would be either really, really big or really, really small. All right, the fifth section is probability and statistics, and this is when we really get to roll up our sleeves and get our math nerd on. So get them rolled up if you haven't already. Now, this is a lot like the last section. It's pretty straightforward. You need to know about probability and statistics. But just because it has a small range of knowledge doesn't mean it's all that simple. If you don't understand these concepts, you're gonna get the questions wrong and probably fail the test. So make sure you take the time to really brush up on these specific concepts. We're gonna start with stats. In my experience, what's almost guaranteed to show up on the test is central tendency measurements. What's a central tendency measurement? They're the mode, median, mean, and range. So here's a tip. You'll probably mostly get graphs and charts to look at and then have to answer the question on those central tendencies. For instance, you may be shown a graph like this one and asked, which type of movie is most popular among children? First, you need to know what you're looking at, so read the chart. And then you might have to use the numbers from the chart to do a simple calculation. This is an easy question to get right if you properly prepare. Use the study guide to prepare. All right, let's circle back to probability. A lot of this boils down to simple calculations of how likely it is that a given event is going to happen. And this really boils down to taking the number of successful outcomes possible, then dividing it by the total number of outcomes possible. So imagine you're in Vegas and you want to bet $100 on red at the roulette table. The successful outcome is that the little ball lands on a red square. The unsuccessful outcome is everything else. So you take everything else, and that becomes your denominator. And then you take your successful outcomes, that becomes your numerator. And generally at a roulette table, you have a 1 in 2 chance of landing on red or black, and so that's your probability of a successful outcome. I know we're flying through these, so if you feel like you've got whiplash, welcome to my world. You need a study guide. Now that we've got over some of the big concepts, let's look at some specific, authentic questions to show you how these concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot of authentic questions, you can click on the free practice test below. At the end, you get a score report on how well you did on the test, and then you can subscribe to 240 and get all the practice questions you need to be 100% confident for the test. Did I mention that the 240 study guide has a money-back guarantee that you'll pass the test? Now, let's go back to mathematics instructions and processes right from the beginning. And we're going to start with manipulative. Marcus is a first grade student working on place value task cards at a math center. Each task card shows an image of base 10 manipulatives, and students are to write the corresponding number in standard form on their recording sheet. Marcus selects a card that shows 100s block and 3 1s cubes. On his recording sheet, he writes that the number shown on the card is 13. Based on the scenario, which of the following tools would be most effective to provide to Marcus? Marcus is struggling to recognize that each place needs to be filled by a digit, even if that digit is 0. Therefore, a place value chart would be an effective tool for Marcus to use. With the task card described in the question, a place value chart would help Marcus recognize that there are 3 1s, 0 10s, and 100, making the number 103. Let's look at one from the pedagogy piece. In this question, we're dealing with assessing students during the first week of school. meaning the teacher's trying to get a better understanding of her students' current knowledge. By giving students the assessment in Choice B, the teacher would be able to gauge which of the following upcoming vocabulary words her students are already familiar with. This allows for the teacher to create lesson plans perfectly match the students' current ability levels. And just like that, we've crossed one entire competency off our list. On to number concepts and operations. Remember for the combining numbers part, I told you about how you'll need to remember the order of operations? Let's take a look at how that's reflected in a question. Simplify the expression 82 minus 100 divided by 4 plus 6 times 12. As we start to run through PEMDAS, there are no parentheses or exponents in this expression, so we can skip those steps. Then we need to move into multiplication and division from left to right. So 100 divided by 4 equals 25, and 6 times 12 is 72. So now our expression is 82 minus 25 plus 72. Now we can simplify the remaining addition and subtraction from left to right, and our final answer is 129. Time to make sense of number sense. Bobby is buying gumballs for 7 of his friends. There are 51 gumballs before Bobby makes his purchase at the store. Bobby wants to give each of his friends the same amount of gumballs and not have any gumballs left over. Which of the following approaches can Bobby use to find the greatest number of gumballs he can purchase to give to his friends? Okay, so this might not sound like a factoring questions that we talked about earlier, but I promise you it is. It's just hidden a little. It's in disguise. If Bobby wants gumballs for each of his 7 friends with none left over, we need to know the multiples of 7. And there are only 51 gumballs in the store, so our number has to be lower than 51. So our best option is choice D. Make a list of the multiples of 7 and then purchase the highest multiple of 7 that's less than 51. Now, it's close to impossible to know every single detail about every math problem that you might be able to get in the history of the world that could come up on this exam. But the 240 study guide can get you pretty close. You'll walk into your test with the confidence that you need because you're guaranteed to pass it. Now let's look at an algebra question. Which of the following options shows a logical and correct first step to solving the algebraic equation given? Even though this is algebra, we still need to remember PEMDAS from earlier, so we can start with the parentheses. If we distribute the 3 and the negative 5 to their respective parentheses, we'll get this choice. 6x plus 3 minus 5x minus 20 equals 11. Now, we're technically done with this question, but let's try some bonus points. Okay, there's really no bonus points on the EC through 6, but you're gonna need to know how to manipulate an equation all the way down to solve for x, so let's go ahead and practice it. We already know that the first step is to distribute. Next, we combine like terms in the same side of the equation. Finally, we isolate x by moving the negative 17 to the other side of the equation. This leaves us with x equals 27. Got it? Good, great. Nice, we're on to slope-intercept. Which of the following equations is written in slope-intercept form? This is where you need to remember y equals mx plus b. The only equation that is in this format is this one, y equals 3x plus 5, with 3 being m and 5 being b. Recognizing slope-intercept form is just the first step in using the equation. To really feel confident dealing with slope, you should check out our study guide where we walk you through it all. This brings us to creating an equation. I still think I should get paid for this. Maria baked 6 dozen cookies for her classmates. There are 28 students in her class. Each child received 2 cookies. Maria then gave 6 cookies both to each her teacher and her principal. Which expression best demonstrates the number of cookies Maria had left over? Let's figure out how many cookies Maria started with first. Now she baked 6 dozen, and a dozen is 12. So we multiply 6 times 12. Next, we need to take away all the cookies that she gave out. So we need grouping symbols. We need to include 2 cookies for each of her 28 classmates and 6 cookies for both her principal and her teacher. So this choice is the correct formula. We've finished patterns in algebra, and we just have 2 competencies left, so stay with me, you're doing great. Next up is geometry and measurement. We're told the west wall of a square room has a length of 13 feet. Now the question wants the perimeter of the entire room. Well, squares have 4 sides of equal measure, that's why it's called a square. So the perimeter of the area around the figure would be 4 times 13, which is 52. Here's a measurement question. Which of the following is the best estimate for the height of a 1-story house? A meter is about the length of a guitar, and a one-story house is about the same height as 5 guitars, so this answer is best. Now it's time for the last competency, probability and statistics. Without looking, Jesse draws a marble from the bag shown. He replaces the marble, gives the bag a good shake, and draws another marble again. What is the probability that Jesse drew a red marble both times? On the first draw, the probability of drawing a red marble is 3 out of 10. Since the marble is replaced, the probability of drawing a red marble on the second draw is still 3 out of 10. So the probability of drawing red on both draws is 3 over 10 times 3 over 10. Last, but certainly not least, statistics. The circle graph shows the results of a survey of 150 students. How many students chose basketball as their favorite sport? Now this problem gives us survey data, a pie chart, and asks how many students chose basketball as their favorite sport. I see an 8% in the wedge for basketball, so I'm gonna pick that choice. Rats! I knew it seemed too easy. Now, let's take a step back and try again. Since 150 students were asked, the percentage doesn't equal the number of students. Instead, we need to multiply the percentage by the total, so 8% times 150. We can do this pretty easily with the calculator we're provided with during the test, so 8% gets entered as the calculator as 0.08, multiplied by 150, which gives us a total of 12 students. Now, if you don't know why 8% is 0.08, I highly recommend you get the 240 study guide because we'll go in depth about why exactly that is. Congratulations on finishing the video. It's pretty impressive. If you found it helpful, give it a like. But there's still plenty to learn. This video is going to prepare you for the Core Subjects EC-6 Social Studies subtest. And in this video, we're going to cover 3 things. What's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that are going to be on the test, and we're going to look at some authentic practice questions so you see how those concepts are going to appear on the test. There is a lot to cover, so let's get started. Now, the Core Subjects EC-6 Social Studies consist of 5 areas, and the test creators call them competencies. These 5 competencies are social science instruction, history, geography and culture, economics, and finally, government and citizenship. Now, these might seem simple, but entire college courses are taught on each one of them. Professor Roselle, I could get used to that. Now, I want to highlight competency 2 and 3 because these are the broadest competencies of them all, and it can be especially challenging because they're so broad to understand exactly what you need to study. But don't worry, we've got you covered because we've analyzed the test and I've studied it and I know what's most likely to come up in each of those competencies. And that's what we're going to cover in this video. Later, we'll look at the most likely concepts to show up as questions in those competencies on the test. So don't worry. But before we get to those 2 big, broad competencies, let's start at the top with social studies instruction. Now, this competency is very straightforward. It's really just how to teach social studies. There are 3 main things to know to get these questions right. The first is how to read charts and tables, specifically bar graphs, scatter plots, pie charts, a population pyramid, or really just a basic table. Another one you need to know is maps, specifically topographical maps, meteorological maps, physical maps, and thematic maps. Now, usually when you're given one of these maps, charts, or graphs, you'll have to look at it, draw a conclusion, and then answer a question. Last, there's pedagogy, and this just means you'll get questions about teaching social studies. Let's take a look at standard K from this competency.
The beginning teacher uses a variety of formal and informal assessments in knowledge of the TExES essential knowledge and skills teach to determine students' progress and needs and to help plan instruction that addresses the strengths, needs, and interests of all students, including English language learners and students with special needs.
And that's a bureaucratic way to say, be a teacher. So you'll really need to know 3 big things. How to use a pre-assessment to assess prior knowledge, what the difference is between formal and informal assessments, and the difference between formative and summative assessments. Since this is social studies instruction, it's also helpful to know about open-ended assessments and project-based learning, and it's important to know how to align assessments with instruction and what to do with results, meaning how they can be used to effectively impact your instruction. So basically, being a teacher. Now let's get to one of the tricky competencies that I mentioned a second ago. This is the second broadest competency we're going to look at, geography and culture. For the geography section, all the questions really revolve around how does the geography of the Earth affect human behavior? Now, I know I sound just as vague as the test creators right now, so let me narrow it down. Simply put, humans respond to their environments, and they might even move because of it. Let's look at an example. Before 1900, every city founded was located near some sort of water source, whether it be an ocean or a river. Fun fact, in 1870, Galveston was the biggest city in Texas. So why water? Well, humans need fresh water to drink, 1, and 2, water was the most efficient, easiest form of transportation. So they wanted an easy, efficient form of transportation to move goods in and out of the city. Water is just one example of how humans adapted their behavior to respond to their environment. Another thing you need to know is the causes of human migration. Specifically, there are 4 reasons humans move: food and, obviously, water, protection, freedom, and better socioeconomic situations. And if you need to brush up on that, you can watch the rest of this video by subscribing to the study guide using the link below. And finally, because it's geography, you need to know major geographic features and where they are relative in the world. Now, you're watching this video for specifics, so let's get specific. You'll most likely be asked about the Sahara Desert, the Himalayan Mountains, the Rocky Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, the Amazon River, the Ganges River, and/or the Mississippi River. In addition to where these features are, you also need to know how they impact the people around them. Free tip, the Appalachian Mountains was a huge geographic barrier during the colonial times, and it impacted human behavior and migration. Overall, the geography competency is really important. It's going to have a lot of questions, so you really want to understand the two-way street between how humans interact with their environment and how the environment shapes human behavior. Are you ready for the broadest category? I keep saying that word broad. It's broad. It's lost all meaning. Broad. Broad. It's a funny word. Anyway, now the B-roadest category of the test is going to be history, because it can really cover anything from the beginning of history until today. And the test makers get a little unfair with the standards of history. Let me show you what I mean. Competency 2, which is history. Item B states that a beginning teacher needs to analyze how individuals, events, and issues shaped the history of Texas, the United States, and even the world. Talk about B-Rod useless. But the good news is I've studied the test and I get to narrow it down for you. Now I'm going to go over some amazing, concrete concepts you really need to know. But to really get the confidence you deserve, subscribe to the study guide because we cover all the topics that you need. So in my experience, I've identified a few key concepts that are highly likely to appear on the test and gives you a nice leg up. The first one is the Columbian Exchange. This refers to the trade that was established when Columbus discovered the New World in 1492. You need to know the goods introduced to the New World from the Old World and the goods introduced from the Old World to the New World. Now the second one's the Northwest Passage. Ironically, it doesn't exist, but just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not important. That's a tough one, huh? The Northwest Passage is the idea that there's this sea-based trade route between North America that connects the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. This would have allowed European powers to quickly and easily establish a sea trade between themselves and China. Finding this was the reason for the exploration in the 1600s. Next, you'll definitely need to know about manifest destiny. This is the idea that the United States' destiny was to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, and it fueled Western expansion in the 1840s and the 1850s. It also led to the Mexican-American War, but that's a freebie. The last concept that's really going to help you out is sectionalism. Sectionalism refers to the growing divide between the northern states and the southern states in the United States prior to the Civil War. The key points of sectionalism that you should know is the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, the Mexican-American War, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, while history is incredibly broad, there's that word again, just knowing these 4 concepts is going to give you a huge leg up on the test. But to really have the confidence for this test and all the other EC-6 tests, you should really subscribe to a 240 study guide. Alright, the 4th section is economics, and I'm gonna nail it for you. It's my favorite one, and luckily the standards here are much more targeted in what it covers. This makes our punch list even more valuable because I'm gonna tell you almost exactly the type of questions that are gonna come up on the test. First up is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost just means that the cost of an event or an action is the next best foregone alternative. Okay, now that sounds really fancy, but opportunity cost really means that the cost of an event or an action is not the amount of money you spend, but rather what else would you have done with that time or with that money. So your next best alternative, your opportunity cost of watching this video, is watching Charlie Bit My Finger.
That's from like 15 years ago.
It's not popular anymore? That's a shame. Next, you'll need to know about scarcity, which just means that in the world we live in, things are not unlimited. So people have to make choices based on their priorities to get what they want, because you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you get what you need. Let's see what the 240 guide has to say about scarcity.
Humans never have enough of what they want. Our wants always exceed our resources. Even the richest man in the world only has 24 hours in a day. This creates scarcity.
The third concept is going to be supply and demand, and it's a really basic economic concept. In short, it says that all economic activity is based primarily on two forces: how much of a good exists, the supply of a good, and how much people want that good, the demand of a good. Hence, the principle of supply and demand. Generally, when demand goes up, price goes up, and then eventually the supply of that good will go up. When demand goes down, price will go down, and then the supply of that good will also go down. The fourth and final thing is comparative advantage. Some producers are better at producing a certain good than others. They can either make it more cheaply, more easily, or just plain better. You could say that I have a comparative advantage when it comes to making amazing, awesome, super fantastic study guides that save teachers time and money. We're almost done, don't worry. The next concept we're going to talk about is the monopoly and the oligopoly. A monopoly is where a firm or a business has complete control over a market, and it can set whatever price it wants because you really don't have another option. Similarly, an oligopoly means that there's just a few businesses or firms that compete against each other, and sometimes they collude or they work together to set prices artificially high. One more, and this is the last one, I promise: mercantilism. And man, is this an old one. Mercantilism says that a country's power is measured in how much gold it has. Gold? Yeah, gold. Money isn't even gold-backed anymore, but back in the day, that's what money was. It was gold. Mercantilism was the prevailing economic philosophy for almost 300 years between 1500 and 1800, and it's the philosophy that drove a lot of decisions during the Age of Exploration, like the search for the Northwest Passage, like the Columbian Exchange, like the entire exploration of North America. And those are the biggest concepts to know about economics. But since it's my favorite, and these terms are going to come up, let's see if I can use them all in one example. So when mercantilism was hot, countries wanted gold, so the demand was super high, and thus the opportunity cost of anything else was not getting gold. But gold is pretty scarce, and you gotta be smart about how you get it. Now, the Netherlands had such a comparative advantage on naval trade that they basically became a monopoly and got to set prices. See, it's my favorite. And finally, let's look at competency 5, government and citizenship. By this point, it probably doesn't surprise you to hear that there is a lot covered in this competency, but I'm gonna hit the high points so you know exactly what you need to. The first concept of government that we're going to discuss is the Articles of Confederation. This was the first governing document that bound the United States together. It wasn't so great. The Articles created a weak federal government that couldn't respond to the challenges of the new nation. They were eventually replaced by what we have today, which is the Constitution of 1787. The next one is Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine in 1776. Common Sense was a pamphlet that encouraged and rallied support for the American Revolution. Now, the only non-American event on our list is the Magna Carta. It was an agreement between the King of England and the nobles of England. So why is that important? It was the first document in history to limit the power of government. Another thing likely to come up on the test is the New Deal. The New Deal is a series of economic programs passed under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, to help stimulate the American economy during the Great Depression. There are 4 constitutional amendments that are highly likely to be on the test: the 13th, 14th, 15th, and the 19th. The 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments deal specifically with the issues of race in America, and they were ratified after the Civil War. These amendments outlaw slavery throughout the United States and make it illegal to prohibit someone from voting based on race or ethnicity. Now, the 19th Amendment enabled women's suffrage, which is the ability for women to vote. And if you don't understand each of these concepts, use the 240 study guide because we go in depth on all the amendments and all these concepts. And finally, for government, I've got 4 court cases that are likely to be on the test. The first is Marbury v. Madison, which established judicial review. Judicial review basically states that the Supreme Court can strike down a law that it deems unconstitutional. The second is the infamous Dred Scott decision, which said that slaves were property and they weren't entitled to the rights and privileges of citizens of the United States. That was overturned after the Civil War. The third is Plessy v. Ferguson, which said that segregation in schools is allowed and constitutional as long as the 2 schools are separate but equal. So the main takeaway is Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. Now, the last court case is Brown v. Board of Education, which overruled Plessy v. Ferguson by proclaiming that segregation of public schools was unconstitutional because separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. And those are the big things to know in Competency 5. Whew, that's a lot. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts, let's look at some practice questions to show you how these concepts can appear on the test. If you want more practice questions than we show in the video, just click the link below and you can get the free practice test on 240tutoring.com. Now for the questions. Remember I told you that you're going to have to analyze a chart, graph, or a map? Let's look how that's reflected in a question. Ms. Sims wants to demonstrate to her students how the price of gasoline has increased over time. Which of the following graphs would best help Ms. Sims demonstrate this concept visually? A bar graph, a pie chart, a line graph, a population pyramid? Since the goal is to see change over time, this choice, a line graph, is our best option. Let's look at one from geography and culture. Here's one of those tricky human migration questions. Which of the following best describes why European settlers in California chose to settle near the San Francisco Bay Area? Social studies exam tip: water's a big deal. One of the most important features when settling a new land is the creation of a harbor so that goods can be shipped in and out without worrying about the big waves of the ocean. So when the first settlers arrived in California, one of their highest priorities was establishing a harbor for trade, and the San Francisco Bay Area is a natural harbor. That means this is the correct answer. Now for the B, road is category. History. Which of the following best describes the primary goal of the first French explorers in North America? Well, France wanted to discover a western sea route to trade with Asia, also known as the Northwest Passage. So Jacques Cartier was the first Frenchman to explore North America. He was sent in 1534 by the commission of the French king to find a western passage to the lucrative markets of Asia. Now, let's look at an economic question. Mr. Scott, hey, that's me. Mr. Scott begins a project among his 4th grade class. He gives the class $20 to purchase pencils and has his students sell them to students who have forgotten their pencils at home. Which of the following economic principles can Mr. Scott's students learn from this project? Mr. Scott is introducing his students to the concept of supply and demand, because his students would supply pencils to the same students that forgot them at home. Now let's look at a government question. Which amendment abolished slavery in America? The 1st, the 13th, the 16th, the 17th? The correct answer is the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865 and outlaws the institution of slavery in the United States. Now, that's just a small sliver of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are going to be assessed on the test. Congratulations on finishing the video. If you found it helpful, please give it a like. There's still plenty more to learn.
This video is going to prepare you for the Core Subjects EC-6 Science subtest. And this video is going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that you'll need to know, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. We've got a lot to do, so let's get moving. Now, the Core Subjects EC-6 Science subtest consists of 18 areas called competencies. Yeah, 18. That's a lot. That's more than any other test in the EC-6. Maybe we stop here and take a deep breath. Okay, we're ready. And don't worry, I'll help you make sense of all of them. Here's the list of competencies as they're given to you, but we can clean this up a bit. Competencies 1 through 6 relate to science instruction and general overarching science concepts. Let's group these and call them Domain A, or teaching science. Competencies 7 through 10 include forces and motion, physical and chemical properties, and 2 on energy. So let's call this domain physical science. Competencies 11 through 14 cover information about living organisms, so we'll call those life science. And finally, competencies 15 through 18 relate to Earth and space, so let's call them that. Whew, much better. Each of these domains contains an entire section of science education, but don't worry, we'll break it down piece by piece. And to test each of those pieces, stay with me till the end and check out our test-aligned practice questions. First up, teaching science. Now, while TExES doesn't officially tell you how many questions are in each competency, it's about 2 questions each. And since this domain has the most competencies, 6 of them, it has the most questions on the exam. The first competency is pretty easy. Most safety questions are going to be common sense, like wearing goggles around chemicals and glass. You may also see a question on when to use specific equipment, like a graduated cylinder. Moving on. The history and nature of science is a bit of a mixed bag, or a box of chocolates. We never know what we're going to get. For the history part, you might be asked what someone like Newton did. For the nature part, you can't forget the scientific method. And because this is a teaching test, you'll be asked a lot about teaching kids that scientific method. One of the most popular ways is using inquiry-based learning. There may also be questions about teaching critical thinking and other science skills. Oh, my favorite, the impact of science. So next time a student asks, "Why are we learning this?" you have that answer locked and loaded. One key thing to know, the difference between renewable and non-renewable resources. Here's how the 240 guide breaks it down. Basically, renewable resources renew. Think green energy and crops. Non-renewable resources do not. Think fossil fuels and minerals. Next, concepts and processes. That's not really descriptive at all. Let's look at some ideas here. Think of this area as the unifying framework. Within science, some things are true if you're studying biology or chemistry or physics or whatever. For example, systems are units scientists study. That could be the human body or a test tube or an ecosystem. They all have inputs and outputs, boundaries and feedback loops. There are a few others, like how form and function always go together. Things change and hit an equilibrium, and each branch of science uses various models. Okay, these next two are about teaching, instruction and assessment. First up, instruction. You'll need to know best practices for using digital technology, diversity and differentiation, increasing engagement, removing misconceptions, and fostering critical thinking comes up here again. And then after you teach it, you have to assess it. Like all TExES exams, you need to know the difference between informal and formal, and formative and summative assessments. Before we leave Domain A, here's one last tip. Since your science knowledge will help you answer these questions, we recommend studying for the other competencies first. For example, you may be asked what resource to use to teach a certain topic, or which terminology fits in with a particular concept. The more you know about those, the easier it will be to pick out the best choice to teach it. We've made it through our first domain. And for better or worse, that was the only one focused on teaching. The rest of the domains are all subject matter content. Let's start with physical science. This is basically simple physics and chemistry. Up first, forces and motion. There are some words with specific meanings here, and they're words you might use in your everyday life, but now you need to know the official scientific definition. Make sure you know the difference between displacement and distance, and speed and velocity. Similarly, you'll want to know the difference between mass and weight, all three of Newton's laws, the 6 types of simple machines, and the mechanical advantage they provide. Whew, got all that? If you need to brush up on any of those, use the link below to get the 240 guide. Moving on to physical and chemical properties. Definitely make sure you know the difference between those terms, both for properties and also for changes. A physical change that comes up a lot is phase changes, like going from a liquid to a gas. Here's an image from our guide. Notice that there are specific names for each change. At each phase, the molecules behave differently. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff they could ask you for in this competency, but that's the biggie to make sure you know. Now, did you notice that energy is in the title of these last two? Look how many times the word energy appears in the descriptive statements. 11! Makes sense, right? TExES is pretty into energy. You'll want to make sure you know the difference between kinetic and potential energy, heat and temperature, and the 3 movements of energy: conduction, convection, and radiation. Let's watch a clip from a 240 study guide video for this last one.
So remember, there are 3 main ways thermal energy is transferred: conduction, through a solid or between 2 materials that are touching; convection, by a moving fluid; and radiation, by an electromagnetic wave.
And that's the key stuff to know in physical science. Next up, life science. Most people like this one the best. Now again, these subjects are broad. You can major in just one of these competencies. So let's go through a few things you'll need to know for each one. First up, structure and function. Many small children are shocked to learn that there are no baby butterflies. They hatch from eggs as caterpillars. That's called complete metamorphosis, and that, plus many other life cycles, can definitely come up on this exam. You'll also want to know the requirements of life, like why a rock isn't alive, the parts and types of cells, and human and plant body systems. If you need to brush up on all of that, it's all in the 240 study guide. Wait, go back to that. Here's that complete versus incomplete metamorphosis bit. See how the butterfly has a pupa stage? That's how it completely changes. Moving right along, let's go to reproduction and heredity. They should really call this genetics battle royale because it's all about knowing who wins the fights within pairs of terms. Like seriously, look at all these pairs of terms to know. That's so many. Good thing the 240 guide has flashcards. Moving on. Contrary to popular rumors, TExES does teach evolution. You're going to need to know the basics. All living things have adaptations that help them thrive in their environment. How did they get them? Let's take a look. According to natural selection, reproductive success varies. This is the survival of the fittest that you've probably heard of. Over time, you get more individuals with these favorable traits, and so eventually, the species gets adaptations. Also, make sure you know what artificial selection is. Last up in life science, organisms and the environment. Basically, ecology. Again, you can major in just ecology, so there's a lot to know here. Let's take a look at one that comes up often, homeostasis. Homeo means same, and stasis means state. So homeostasis is the ability to remain in the same condition. Basically, organisms do stuff to stay how they want to be. If you get hot, your body sweats to cool you off, like how I'm struggling to do some homeostasis under these hot studio lights. Whew, this flower is wilting. Within your body, lots of organs work hard to maintain homeostasis, like your kidneys constantly filtering your blood. Reptiles, plants, even fungi, they all do homeostasis. And that wraps up life science. Need to brush up on any of that? Check out the 240 guide using the link. We're almost done with content, and then we'll move into practice questions. The last domain is Earth and space science. Up first, structure and function of the Earth. You need to know the names and properties of the layers of the Earth and the atmosphere, so from the inner core all the way out to space. One key layer of the Earth is the lithosphere, which forms tectonic plates. Movement within the lithosphere drives constructive and destructive processes. Here's an example from our guide. As two plates move apart, the mantle comes up and constructs new crust. Some change happens again and again. We call those Earth cycles. There are 4 you need to know for this test: rock, water, carbon, and nitrogen. You could Google them and hope to find all the right info, or just use our study guides. Next up, energy again? Yep, but this time with a focus on weather and climate. Speaking of, make sure you know the difference between those two terms. Weather is short-term, while climate is long-term. Make sure you know what causes weather and climate. For example, the rain shadow effect makes areas behind mountains drier. Okay, last up, basic astronomy. Now, I know it says solar system and the universe over there, but the exam really likes to ask questions a little closer to Earth. I'm talking about the lunar cycle. Make sure you know why the moon appears differently across the 28-day cycle. Here's another image from the 240 guide. For example, the full moon appears when the moon is basically behind the Earth. And those are the big things to know here. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts, let's look at some practice questions to show you how these concepts can appear on the test. Now, you seem to really like videos. Videos are a great way to learn science. Did I mention the 240 guide has a lot? And I mean a lot of videos? We have over 60 for the EC-6 science. Now for questions. Let's start all the way back at the beginning, in the teaching science domain. First up, lab safety. Which of the following is a safe laboratory procedure? Many volatile compounds are quite toxic and can produce long-lasting health effects. Fume hoods are designed to increase airflow to remove fumes and protect any lab occupant from inhaling them. So this is the best answer. Let's check out that concepts and processes section. Which of the following accurately summarizes the difference between a hypothesis, a scientific theory, and a scientific law? The best choice here is D. A hypothesis is a predicted outcome. A theory is a proposed explanation based on evidence, and a law is a documented description of observations surrounding a phenomenon. Let's do one more in Domain A. How about assessment and instruction? Which of the following statements best describes a formative assessment? Summative assessments are used to determine what students know at the end of the year or at the end of a unit. But formative assessments measure what students know along the way. They should be given on a regular basis. Domain A, done. Now we're moving on to the actual science questions. Starting with physical science, specifically simple machines. Jennifer moves her wheelchair up a ramp to enter a building. The ramp she is using is an example of which simple machine? While all the answers listed are simple machines, an inclined plane, or ramp, is the example of a simple machine which increases the distance of travel, but decreases the force needed. And let's look at a question on matter. A solid gold bar is melted in a smelter. Which of the following statements correctly compares the volume of the solid bar to the volume of the liquid gold? Volume is a measure of space occupied. Although both have the same number of molecules, the heat needed to melt the gold increases the spaces between molecules in the liquid. The liquid will have a greater volume, so this is the best answer. Let's move on to life science. Specifically, let's talk about metamorphosis. The diagram shows the life cycle of which of the following organisms? The butterfly is the only organism listed that undergoes complete metamorphosis, which includes a pupa stage. Ooh, how about those natural selection questions? What do those look like? Pressures driving natural selection include all of the following except available resources, climate change, and predator-prey relationships all do drive natural selection. But equal populations of all organisms would not drive natural selection to occur. So this is the best choice. We're almost there, just one domain left. Let's peek into some Earth and space science questions. How about a question on the rock cycle? Pieces of broken rock often become cemented together to form a new rock. This rock is referred to as, this is the best answer. Sedimentary rocks are formed when sediments or pieces of broken rock are cemented together to form a new rock. And last, but not least, how about we check out a question on the phases of the moon? Which of the following best describes the conditions of a full moon? A full moon occurs when the full face of the moon is illuminated by the sun and visible from the Earth. So this is the correct choice. This occurs only when the Earth is between the moon and the sun. Congratulations on finishing the video. If you found it helpful, give it a like. There's still plenty more to learn. This video is going to prepare you for the Core Subjects EC-6 Fine Arts, Health, and Physical Education test. And this video is going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts you'll need to know, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Now, the Core Subjects EC-6 Fine Arts, Health, and PE consists of 5 areas called competencies. These are visual arts, music, health, physical education, and theater. That's right, this test unites painters, rockers, health nuts, athletes, and the drama club. It's a true rainbow coalition. And the descriptive statements for each of these competencies are pretty vague and might leave you feeling even more confused. But don't worry, that's where I come in. Let's take care of our fine arts competencies first. Then we'll finish up with health and PE. Competency 1 covers visual arts, so art you look at. You'll need to know elements of art, such as color, texture, shape, form, line, space, and value. And principles of art, like emphasis, contrast, pattern, rhythm, balance, proportion, and unity. That sounds like a lot of terms, but guess what? We have them all covered in our study guide. So let's put on our art critic glasses and talk through a couple of elements. Maybe you'll feel like you're spending a peaceful afternoon at an art museum with me. I bet you didn't expect that benefit when you press play on this video. As an element of art, line refers to a moving point on the surface of a canvas or other media. It has width as well as length. The functions of line are to direct our eyes around and through a composition, and to express moods or feelings. What kind of mood or feelings do you have from the use of line in this piece of art? Drop it in a comment below. Just don't get out of line. Let's discuss one more element. As an element of art, a shape is a 2-dimensional area defined by a boundary. Geometric shapes are mathematical in proportion, such as a circle, square, rectangle, or triangle. Organic shapes are irregular and/or curved, usually derived from nature. We see examples of both types of shape in this piece of art. If you want to see the rest of the elements, as well as everything else you need to know to pass this exam, check out the 240 study guide. Has everyone tuned their instruments? Let's move on to the music competency. Here you'll answer questions about the concepts and skills related to the creation and appreciation of music. Let me be real with you. A lot of different concepts about music will come up here. I'm going to go over an important, concrete concept you should know. First, let's discuss a musical arrangement called a round. A round is a song in which 2 or more people sing exactly the same melody, but they begin at different times. Popular rounds include Row, Row, Row Your Boat and The Farmer in the Dell. When teaching students to sing rounds, begin by having the entire group sing in unison. Then, as students become more familiar with the words, rhythm, and melody, have students begin singing at different times. And here's a tip. Creating choreography for different parts of the song will add interest and excitement. We're going to skip health and PE for now, but don't worry, we'll cover them in just a bit. So don't sweat it, sporty friends. Let's boogie on into our final fine arts competency. Here, we'll break a leg as we perform engaging theater instruction. And don't worry, you won't need your understudy. Let me show you a descriptive statement that I think is extra important for this competency. Integrates instruction in theater with instruction in other subject areas. Aha! Integrating with other subjects. There's a lot of potential there. There are characters in plays, just like there are characters in stories. Studying both theater and fiction can help students understand characterization. Also, reader's theater is a popular tool for teachers to use to help students develop reading fluency. While they're practicing reading with expression, they're also learning about following directions on scripts. Oh, and let's not forget about social studies. There are many theatrical productions that align with historical events covered in the TExES. Look for ways that elements of theater can support classroom instruction. I hope we ate our veggies today because next on the menu is the health competency. The health competency covers a wide array of topics, ranging from human body systems to growth and development to family behaviors and lots in between. Let's spend our time together talking about ways to maintain a healthy lifestyle. These are important to know for your exam. A healthy lifestyle consists of many factors, such as nutrition, fitness, exercise, relaxation, stress management, and disease prevention. There are several effective ways to take a proactive approach to disease prevention, including practicing moderation when consuming foods and beverages high in sugar. These can elevate blood sugar and increase the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. Getting enough sleep is also important for disease prevention and overall health. Lack of sleep is associated with reduced cognitive function and a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, stroke, and diabetes. And both of these practices are beneficial and appropriate to introduce to elementary students as part of their health instruction. All right, ready to get fit? Let's lace them up and sprint into our physical education competency. This competency is all about physical activity, including strategies for promoting a positive environment for all students to learn about and work on their fitness. Here's a tip. If you see a question about students struggling with an activity, look for the answer that removes the obstacle and allows students to have success. For example, young students struggling to hit a ball off a tee? Use a bigger ball. This would provide a bigger target for students, but they would still be completing the original activity. You'll also need to be familiar with physical education terminology. Let's go over a couple of words that are highly likely to come up on your exam. Locomotor skills involve moving the body from one location to another. Most locomotor movements involve the feet, but they may also include the hands. Some examples are walking, running, jumping, hopping, galloping, and skipping. Non-locomotor skills involve moving the body while remaining stationary. Examples include bending, stretching, twisting, swaying, wiggling, shaking, and balancing. So basically, with locomotor activity, you go somewhere, and with non-locomotor, you don't. And if you don't know the rest of the content that will come up on the exam, because you need to, use the 240 study guide. It'll save you a lot of time, and it's worth your peace of mind. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts, let's look at some practice questions to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. And if you want a lot of practice questions, you can click the free practice test below. At the end, you get a score report on how well you did on the test, so you'll know just where to study. Now let's do a dress rehearsal with our practice questions. Remember when we talked about elements of art? Prior to asking a class of 4th graders to paint a picture of the sky, the teacher shows them a model and discusses how the intensity of color changes within the painting, with colors near the sun being brighter than colors further away. The teacher is using this activity to introduce which of the following elements of art: value, form, texture, or space. Now I have to admit, my first thought was choice D, space. But when I click on that as I'm working through my study guide, I see that it's not the best choice. The best part is, the answer feedback also helps me see why space is not correct. The answer is actually value, which is the amount of lightness or darkness a color has. Let's look at one from the music competency. Remember, a lot of different concepts will be covered here. What is the importance of learning solfège according to the Kodai concept? The correct answer is that it helps students understand how notes relate to one another. Feel like you need to know more about that? It's covered in the study guide. All right, let's move on to a question from the theater competency. Mrs. McKenzie wants her students to understand that theater has had an impact throughout history and on many different cultures through the telling of stories. Which of the following activities would best promote this concept among students? Having each student research a notable story to find its culture and significance, then have the student read aloud the story and the research findings is the best choice. The students would better understand how various stories originate in different cultures and how the culture is reflected within the story. Now let's answer a question about health. Children are more susceptible to asthma than adults because, well, although physical activity might bring on an asthma attack, increased physical activity does not result in development of asthma, so this is not our answer. Increased time outside also does not result in development of asthma, so we can eliminate this one. People do not develop immunity to asthma, so this is not the one we want either. Infants and toddlers' bronchial tubes, or passageways that allow air to enter and leave the lungs, are small and narrow, making this our correct answer. Let's finish up with a PE question. Which of the following activities would best help develop the movement concept of spatial awareness? Spatial awareness is an awareness of oneself and other objects in space. Spatial awareness also includes understanding the relationships of objects when there is a change in position. Children would use these skills to accurately throw balls into buckets at varying distances. Now that's just a small sampling of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are assessed on the test. For even more info, click the link below. Congratulations on finishing the video. If you skipped any sections, give me a lap. If you found it helpful, give it a like. And please share it with your scene partners and teammates. There's still plenty more to learn. Did you know that our study guide has 78 pages of study material? If you really want to make sure you're prepared for the core subjects EC-6 Fine Arts, Health, and PE exam, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 study guide. It's test aligned, so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has hundreds of practice questions, so you can be sure you're ready. And it has a money-back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.